imagine the Antiques Roadshow where the gay erotica posters pop up and they're like, oh, it was this guy and he called himself Bullethole. And for various reasons, it's going for $10,000.
Meet Bullethole, a digital and screen-printed queer erotic artist whose bold, cheeky digital nudes and screen-printed tees have turned heads from Instinct magazine to the Dallas Eagle. With a background in graphic design and a love for comic book aesthetics, Bullethole's work fuses masculine and feminine energy, humor, and unapologetic sexuality, often featuring bearded, hairy men with a pop of color and a wink to gay culture. Today, Bullethole opens up about the controversies his art has sparked in online queer spaces, the constant dance with Instagram censorship, and the vulnerability of putting raw, erotic art into a world that doesn't always want to see it. You'll hear how he balances creative freedom with audience expectations, why he refuses to water down his vision for mainstream acceptance, and what it's like to be recognized by strangers for art that's both intimate and public. What does it mean to make queer art for queer eyes? And what happens when the world tries to look away? Let's dive into the unfiltered truth with Bullethole. This is Art in the Raw. All right, welcome to Art in the Raw. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's a weekend, so that's great. I have been spending a lot of my weekends trying to do artwork and, if I can schedule a photo shoot during the weekend, that's usually probably a better time because my work week ends up being pretty busy.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I'm not doing that, then I'm like trying to edit photos or, I'm trying to sort of balance it out. But then there's some weeks where it feels like I don't really have like a break because everything at some point turns into work no matter how much you enjoy it. So this weekend, I was kind of just wanting to just chill out and take a little bit of a break. I think that over time, like what started off as more just like a fun thing to just like do some art and post it on Instagram, as I started gaining followers and I started getting more sort of, I guess, connected to it in sort of a work sense. All of a sudden, some of that pressure started coming on. As was like, oh, well, I have to do this. Or I work as a creative director for digital media, like during my regular day. So I have, internal people, client people, everybody wants to be creative. Everyone has an opinion and you have to learn to take feedback and bend. And then sometimes by the end of it, it's not really as close to your original idea as you wanted it to be. And when I started doing this as sort of like a side thing that was just mine, that like it was one of those things where if I did the creative and you like it, great, but I'm not really taking any critique or feedback on what I should do or how I should do it.
This is your vision, not somebody else's.
Right. And I want it to just be able to have something that it was like, that was mine, that was my, creative output. So, and I think that helped with maybe some of the frustration I would have with my regular job because I couldn't really just say like, fuck you. And, this is how I, think that it should go. You have to kind of like, okay, that sounds like a great idea to make that logo bigger and, that sort of things. It's been a good outlet, but I will say as I've kind of started organically kind of growing it, there's become this sort of like pressure to, I don't know, it starts sort of
it's a responsibility,
like a side job,
Yeah.
So, I can't just kind of be like willy-nilly about it when I feel like doing it, So
exactly.
Anyway, that's kind of where I am with things, but I still really like, doing it. I still really get into, these sort of like spaces where I'm like, I really want to get this out and create something new and, or something or someone will sort of like inspire me to, create and go in a direction. But I like to ride that wave. I think that's partially the best part of being creative. I don't really think people should be like creative on demand.
Yeah.
Although I have to do that to some degree, but at least in a work sense, you're kind of playing Russian roulette as far as,
you got to make things work for the client when you're doing it for work, right?
Yeah.
This way you get to make it just the way you want it.
Yeah. And if I have a break and I don't feel inspired or, nothing's coming to me, like it's not like the weight of the world on my shoulders or necessarily my paycheck on the line.
So is your Is your daytime career the kind of driving force behind the pseudonym Bullethole instead of using your real
No,
name?
well, it's kind of funny. The whole thing came as a joke that my husband and I don't know what we were talking about, but we always are kind of like very jokey back and forth. And it was kind of our little like joke about like a butthole. And we were just like, oh, that's your bullet hole that you got shot, you know? So, and then like the creative thing took over me and I was like, I was picturing it in my head and I was like, oh my God, that would be like a really cool logo that it because I always like mixing, especially when you are in a culture. I like that sort of mix or contrast of masculine and feminine. And I thought like there's nothing more sort of like hardcore if you think about it than like an actual like bullet hole, but then taking it and making it pink and then sort of alluding to the fact that this looked like something else, just depending on the coloration and the context of it. But it still had that sort of like masculine, you know, feminine kind of balance that I
Hmm.
thought was kind of interesting. And I don't know how I necessarily tied that, together, but in my head, because I've worked in advertising and stuff, I was like, oh, that's like a good logo. I could spin a lot of things, I think, off of that, which there's been some weird things that have happened along the way. Like people have come up to me, it's not original. I chuckle when they say it. They're like, oh, when I first saw it, I thought it said butthole. I was like, well, okay, great. You got the
Then maybe
gist
it
of it.
worked.
Right, right, right. I mean, you got the gist of, what I was trying to get at, maybe not in the way that I wanted you to, but I was like, it's kind of the same thing to me. And then I was posting some stuff and trying to get some exposure, and I found this group. It was like a bear group on Facebook, and it was sort of like mainly guys like in New Zealand. And this was, I think maybe I don't know, like 2020 or maybe even a little bit earlier than that. And, there was the whole thing with, violence against people of color and that sort of thing. And I had a couple of pieces of artwork that I showcased that had, black eyes in them. And then I had my logo on it. And all of these guys in this Facebook New Zealand group, like, jumped on me and they were saying, like, how can you do that? That's violence against people of color in your drawing. And I'm like, it's a guy in a jock with his butt hanging out. And I was like, that's not even like what my logo is meant to convey. It's certainly not what I was, showing because I have other, you know, people in them. And so, but, I will say, like, I've been very lucky, I think, knock on wood, that I haven't gotten any really like negative reaction on my artwork or my Instagram. Everyone's been really cool, especially what I like to call like the gay, like art community on Instagram. Like everyone's been very welcoming and super nice and like, sharing, you know, their experiences and putting their artwork out there and that sort of stuff. And then as far as people that follow me, it's always been really, really positive. That particular one got so bad I just left the group and I blocked it because I was just like
Wow.
I was like, you're not even wanting to listen to, where I'm
To
coming
your side of the
from and
story.
the side of things. So there
Yeah.
was that. And then I've
There's
gotten it.
always a little controversy is certainly good for creating a following.
Yeah, but I'm one of those people that like I just have a very low tolerance for that sort of stuff, like even in my personal thing. And I'm just like, if I just don't like it and I don't feel like I feel the need to like engage, I'm just like, that's what the block button's for. So
Exactly.
I just block, and I'm like, if it's one less follower, well, because that's not the kind of engagement that I want to have on there, and I'm fully in control of that. So even because like it is public, so I don't have like a private one where if you come to it, you have to like ask to follow me. So it's public.
There's a lot of vulnerability in putting all of your work out there on the line that can sometimes attract those negative comments, those negative energies.
Yeah.
How
Well,
do
the
you
only other
handle?
there's been some things around body positivity and like certain, and I try to do a spectrum, right?
Mhm.
But as I've explained, and people have really taken this logically as an explanation, is like I put things out there all the time, and it's up for you people to like it and engage with it so that it can be visible. And I was like,
Mhm.
But when I have put those sorts of things out there, I don't get the engagement that I generally do. So I'm not sure why it's my responsibility to have to put certain things out there when you, as an audience, if you're wanting that, like, why aren't you engaging more, right? Why aren't you commenting more? Why aren't you, so I think it's sort of like a two-way thing there. But
Let's kind of dig back to where you began. Take me back to the very first time that you realized that you loved drawing sexy, almost naked men.
okay,
What
I
was
thought you
that
were just going to
moment
say
like?
drawing.
And what was that? Yeah, just drawing sexy men. What was that like?
Well, I think maybe the root of the whole thing probably came down to, like, when I was a kid, I was like very into comic books and superheroes, and there's always a lot of very exaggerated, proportions and
Hmm.
muscles and that sort of thing. But you know, as a kid and even as an adult, like, I like drawing women just as much as I like drawing men. I don't have them up constantly, but, like, I don't know. This is probably my sort of my guilty pleasure is, the Real Housewives. And so I have a couple of portraits, like I did one like of Erica Jane, and because she's kind of like a gay, you know,
On.
personal icon and things like that. Lisa Rinna, I did a couple of those. Like, I like drawing like boobs, and I don't know what it is. I mean, I like drawing sexy women. I think probably as much as I like drawing sexy men. But I think probably, like, starting off like as a kid, maybe not realizing like what gay was or what that was. Like, I liked the fantasy, I think, of these sort of hyper, exaggerated, kind of super people. And then I sort of, as I progressed in my, drawing and my ability, I really was drawn to just like capturing people. And then when I went probably, and started to do this, because I'd always done like here and there, like, really, you know, as much as I could, photorealistic portraits, and I would do some of the like sexier, images, and a lot of that stemmed from, me, my love of photography, and wanting to, like, I didn't feel like I had the capability or the skills to execute it in photographs, but I could mirror that in my artwork. And so taking a lot of those kind of influences and, thinking about like beefcake photography, and, even going back to all the like physique pictorials, obviously, like every other gay man, Tom of Finland, there was that sort of, influence. But I always thought that there was a very big lack of, I don't know, this sounds insulting to probably a lot of gay artists out there, but there seemed to be like a really lack of really good gay erotic art that had like a point of view or a certain like sensibility. I think Tom of Finland is probably the one that where you could literally like look and point out and say and know that that's a Tom of Finland, and the characteristics that he gives, his figures with a very tiny waist and the very square jaw. There's there's something very, I think, recognizable, in his style, and also in the storytelling that he had. And then most of the other stuff I would see, like, you know, this is going back to like old gay porn magazines where, they would have like the erotica story, and they might have like one or two little drawings to go with it. And again, no insult to the people that were doing those drawings, but they, I don't know, they always seemed a little cheaper, me, than to like straight counterparts, because I had always been like a
Okay.
fan of like good girl art. So you think of like Vargas and,
Yeah.
those kind of like pinup sort of things that were, even though they were pinup, they were actually accepted as like legitimate art, with a point of view. There
Hmm.
was a little bit of a sense of humor, a cheekiness, to that. And I never really saw anyone come in and say, oh, that's something that has a definite stylistic point of view, and it's a little fun, and it's a little sexy, it's a little cheeky. And I kind of thought, well, I'd like to execute something like that and kind of maybe fill that space. And in some of my earlier ones, which I've started to maybe gravitate back to, I had more sort of like scenarios set up. I had like the guy on, I did a Valentine's Day post and he's running out in the towel and the towel's falling and he's doing the old thing of Charlie Brown checking his mailbox for Valentine's. I had like a TSA like pat down set up. And then what started happening is when I started working on the t-shirts, um, you get into screen printing and you start getting a lot of detail on there, and then it ends up just being this like big square on
Yeah.
a t-shirt, and I just didn't necessarily sort of want to do that. So I landed on kind of like the circle with the different color, the pop of color. Sometimes I'll do a square or I'll do another shape, but it really helped me be able to have not only the character or the the guy I was drawing pop out of that segment, but it
Mm-hmm.
also gave it something to sit against that created some nice negative space, like if you were going to have it on a t-shirt.
How is being in Texas with its mix of conservatism and kind of some of our queer rebellion that we've got here in Dallas and Austin and some of the other big cities? How has that
Uh,
shaped your
you know,
perspective as a gay audience? How does being in Texas influence your art?
I don't know if it does or not. I've always been very much, I'm going to do what I want to do when it comes to my artwork, unless you're paying me to not do that. If you're paying me enough money to not do something or what you want to do, I'm like, sure, well, that's fine. But then I'm going to turn around and, on my own time, I'm going to do what I want to do. So I don't think I've ever let anything like sort of like deter me from doing it. I mean, I will say just in Texas, I don't necessarily go out to everyone and shout from the rooftops that I have, an Instagram that does like gay, erotic art,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to sort of like choose your audience of who you might share that, with, who might either be impressed or intrigued, or they may just see it as like a mark against you,
Mm-hmm.
that, oh, wow, you're drawing dirty pictures or something. And the funny thing is
Yeah,
like,
because it's fun.
I don't think, I don't really think any of the stuff that I do is, and, obviously I'm restrained by what I could put on Instagram and that sort of stuff. I don't really consider it dirty. I feel like it's like, again, it's one of those things where in straight erotic illustration, they get away with a lot more because they're like, oh, that's like humorous, or like it's dirty, but it's funny dirty, or it's sexy, right? It doesn't, you don't
Straight, so
ever,
it's okay.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, but I think regardless of whether I'm in Texas or you're in New York City or wherever it is, I mean, I'm sure there's like, you know, certainly a more level of like mainstream acceptance, but there's always that thing that's there where, straight is always much more, acceptable, except for the people that are the complete prudes and like think all of it's horrible and, causing the demise of our society and, like sexually repressed, you know, in all of their thinking. But like that's not my audience, so I don't really care. And if it is my audience, they're looking at it in secrets. Honestly, I don't
A
care
lot
about
of
that
them
either.
are.
Like if that's your thing and that's how you want to do it, I'm not here to like judge how you want to do it. I just don't want you, to be the person that like likes to look at it, and then you're going to turn around and try to like,
Judge you for making it.
judge me for making it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit and kind of talk about how your art gets made and your craft. You've kind of moved over time from kind of traditional mediums to fully digital drawing, and now you've started doing more and more photography as part of your art. What pushed those changes, and how did it open any new creative doors for you?
I would say a lot of what, I don't know, there's like, that's a, you probably don't think that's a very like layered question, but it is sort of a layered question.
A little
I
bit.
have a I have a super short attention span. I don't I've never been diagnosed as, ADD, but I'm sure that I probably am.
Hmm.
I have notebooks and notebooks of like hand drawings where there's pages of unfinished drawings. and there was a certain urgency to like get something done and get it out, unless it was like for school and I had a deadline and I knew I had to meet that deadline in order to like,
Mm-hmm.
get my grade. But as far as just like on my own driving my creative, like if I didn't get it out just as I was like feeling it and vibing, and if I didn't get it finished, I would suddenly be like squirrel, and there was something else that I wanted to start drawing,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had a lot of sort of unfinished sort of stuff and a little bit of perfectionist. Sort of my origin story goes back because my dad worked at a paper mill, and so I always had paper. He would bring me like, you know, stacks of paper, and I would be like this kid and I would be looking at my comic books and trying to like make it perfect and draw, and if it didn't get perfect I'd crumble it up because it wasn't wasteful because I had plenty of paper, and there would be like these wads of paper around me, and I'm sitting there trying to get it exactly right. So there's that aspect to it. um, Along the way, I mean, I certainly all the way through my education had mostly worked in traditional because that was really the only thing that was offered. When I first started doing like the graphic design part of my career, like I started working on Macs, and I think some of that sort of stuff influenced because there's illustration that can be done with vector and that sort of thing, and that really wasn't good with my level of patience because you have to kind of make all the different points to outline the artwork. So it's always been like a desire to do something digital, but it couldn't take a lot of effort in order to do it. And there's been a couple of styluses and like a Wacom pad and certain pencils that I've tried along the way, and none of them felt like a real pencil or a real instrument, or the output never was really
Mm-hmm.
good. So it was really the technology that managed to catch up with my impatience, with or frustration with it for that it didn't feel right. And so I had gotten for Christmas, I had gotten an iPad Pro, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what gen. It was one of the first gens of the Apple Pencil, and it was like a revelation because it was the
Mm-hmm.
first time I had actually used a pencil or a stylus that worked like a real pencil and acted like one. Like if you turned it to its side, depending on the brushes, it would actually like shade or, give you that sort of impression. And then the other thing that was really interesting about that was that I had worked for so many years in graphic design and obviously very familiar with Photoshop and doing that. And Photoshop
Mm-hmm.
works in layers. And the drawing program that I ended up really gravitating toward was Procreate,
Mm-hmm.
which was like an incredible offering for an app with that, because the people who started it, it was basically, I think it was like $20 and you never had to pay any additional fees.
Mm-hmm.
They continue, and they have continued to this day to update it. And the most apps, when you buy into the apps, there's always like, we want you to subscribe or
Yep.
monthly, or
Subscription
they'll
model.
have subscription model, or they have little hidden fees, if you want to unlock certain functionality or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, it felt very much like an app that was created by creative people who wanted people to just make stuff.
Nice.
And so there's actually a big Procreate community out there. There's a lot of like blogs and forums where people share brushes. Like you can create your own brushes in Procreate.
Mm-hmm.
Or one thing that I go out and do is like I've gone out and I've actually bought packages because I kind of look at the brush sets like fonts, because there are people that are really talented, and I bought a set which I really love, which each one of the pencils and pens imitated a particular cartoon artist from like the old comic book strips, or not comic book, comic strips. And so there's like lots of different technique in that, and there's a lot of different brushes that you can use, and it's fast. As I was working through it, and there's things that you can do layering colors on top of each other rather than just trying to, in a traditional manner. Like once you start putting color down and it doesn't work, then you have to put more color over it, or,
Mm-hmm.
or you mess it up. Like there's no undo button. I knew I was really hooked when I had been doing it for like maybe a year, and I still like to do hand drawn stuff because I'll doodle while I'm at work on the phone or whatever. And there's a certain area that you go to on the iPad where you hit the undo button. And but I was using an actual pencil on a piece of paper, and I did something I didn't
No.
like, and I automatically took my hand to go to the corner. I was like, you can't do that on a piece of paper. So, I mean, that's how like ingrained I got into the actual digital stuff, coming from a very, very traditional, you know, background. So I think it was just really the technology caught up. Short answer, technology caught up. I found that I could output at the rate that I wanted to like get an idea out, get it out really fast, finish
Hmm.
it, start on something else. And
You
it was
do seem
finished.
to be very fast, I've noticed, because for some of the listeners, I run a monthly drink and draw event at the Dallas Eagle, and Kent has attended a number of them. And I notice some of the amount of art that you're able to create in short periods of time on your Procreate tool and your device is impressive to me.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because I mean I'm pretty speedy in that, but that's one of the things that I've always sort of been vain about in my regular drawing because I can tell you a story. I had a drawing class and my professor, it was basically the same setup as your drink and draw,
Hmm.
where we would start off the beginning of the class and we were supposed to keep sketches very loose and nothing needed to be like finished or refined. And I'm all about like details you know, and so just to do like a quick figurative sketch that I would be done and all of my classmates would still be sitting there drawing. So I would walk around and I would look at other people's stuff and make comments, like smart aleck in my 20s, go to the water fountain, get some water, pal around. And my professor was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know, I'm done. If I keep drawing, I'll have a finished drawing by the time everyone else is doing this. And at some point I came out and I apparently offended him and made the mistake of saying like, I'm bored. And he goes, my class bores you? And I was like, I guess. And so I had a big pad on my lap. He snatched the pad out of my hand, threw it on the floor in front of me. And then he walked across the room and he grabbed a yardstick and some tape. And then he came over, he snatched my pencil out of my hand, and I had no idea what was going on. And the entire class is watching this go on, and
Wow.
the model sitting there, right? And he takes the tape and tapes my pencil to the end of the yardstick, and then hands me the opposite end of the yardstick and points at my pad on the ground. He goes, "Be bored in my class now." And he wanted me to draw with the pencil attached to the end of the yardstick,
Wow.
but my ego still there. I was like, I can still do better than everybody in this class and get it done. So I proceeded to, do my drawing and do my thing. I took it as a challenge. But yeah, that was a very vivid, memory of
Wow.
like, the result of me being sort of quick. But, it's always got its pros and cons because I was quick. Sometimes it was be like, I don't want to go to class today. I'm just going to hang out and then I'll just quickly do some sketches and then it'll be fine.
I'm glad I never took an art class with that teacher. Hey, queers. If this conversation moves you, don't just listen. Help us keep this platform alive so we can keep amplifying queer voices in art. Salon Natural and Art in the Raw shine a spotlight on queer artists because their truth leads the way. Follow us on social, subscribe to our newsletter, or join our Patreon for exclusive content. Every follow, share, and membership keeps queer art visible and vibrant. Links are in the show notes. Thank you for standing with us and for keeping our community bold, creative, and unfiltered. Stay raw, y'all. So you obviously do art with models when you're at the drink and draws. You
Mm-hmm.
work with models in the photography that you're starting to do now. Um, and I noticed that you offer some custom portraits for people. Tell me, what's it like collaborating with someone, turn their body into art, or do you often do art where you don't have a model to work from?
This, in fact, is not a model.
Hmm.
I I have a lot of my art. I started off doing just like from my imagination and from my brain, like scenarios and things that I did. I've done enough, figure drawing and life studies that like I'm pretty familiar with. I can be a medical illustrator and tell you what all the muscles are and like where
Wow.
everything goes and how everything looks. But like I have a good enough sense of anatomy to where, and I think a lot of that came from like the comic book drawing because you have to put like the heroes in all sorts of poses and that
Hmm.
sort of thing and making sure the body looks proportionate and, realistic to a point. You don't have muscles in places where there are no muscles. And so I started off doing that. And then I think what happened was, I had somebody ask me, if I did portraits, which I've done portraits through the years. Like that's one of the things I've always been probably a little taken some pride in is actually being able to do portraits and catch a resemblance
Hmm.
of someone. So and I was like, yeah, sure. And he would be what I later kind of coined as a bear celebrity because he had a big Instagram following. And I had started organically on Instagram, and it was much easier to get people to like see your content and follow you when I started. I probably didn't start soon enough, doing it. I kind of came in sort of in the middle. But what happened from that was he reshared the drawing and he had like, thousands of followers. And then all those people came and followed me.
Nice.
And so it became a little bit of a strategy to grow my followers to kind of like target someone. I would, usually just approach them through like a DM and say, hey, I do these, and
Hmm.
although I did do, commission, it was sort of like a trade of equity, right? So it was
Yeah.
just like, if you have enough equity, then it's worth my time to sort of do this because it helps me get more views and more people looking at my artwork. And so I would kind of just like barter with them. And then I would either use an existing picture on their Instagram to base the artwork on. Or sometimes what I would do is if I wanted something a little more original, I would send them like poses.
Hmm.
And so I would just kind of like do a Google search and find something. And I'm like, oh, could you pose in this manner and then do a selfie? I was like, or you can maybe like take several shots and I can sort of recomposition them together just so that I'm getting, enough reference, to be able to do it. And then I would reference work that way. And then I kind of toggled that between like, oh, I have this idea in my head of like a scenario where, I don't have a model, but in my head I can, look
Piece
together. Or,
together.
or I would see a photograph that might inspire me and I would be like, oh, if I change these things about it, it'll be more like what I want it to be. And so, and always like the face and the features, the whole Bullethole thing is around like booty. So they're always like bearded, always hairy, and that's not to, push out anyone that's smooth or say that there's nothing, and I mean, I do have some that I've done portraits of and, the guys tend to not be, as hairy as like the ones that I depict, but like usually the ones that I'm just depicting, like, I mean, and that's tiresome. I got to tell you, I mean,
Drawing all that hair,
every,
I
all
imagine.
that hair is, and I mean, they don't have any clothes on. So I don't even have, I don't even have them in a shirt to like
Labor of
give
love,
me a
though,
little
isn't it?
break, it, at some points, again, some of that like ADD kicks in, and I'm just like, oh, I just want to be done with
Or
this.
you
I
get
just want to
hyper
be done with
focused on
this.
all the hair and you can just knock it out and get lost in
Yeah,
it.
yeah, and your wrist starts to give out on you after a certain point.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't know. So I think everything that I've done has probably a little bit of my marketing brain going
Hmm.
on where it
I'm
clicks and I'm
sure.
like, oh, this thing that sort of happened organically, I can take this and use it to actually, move things sort of forward. And then that's where I ended up getting, a little bit more exposure and I got approached to do some of the interview stuff for like the Instinct magazine thing came.
Hmm.
That was like a crazy thing where I like woke up one day and like there were like hundreds of, you know, followers,
Followers.
new followers. And then after that, the out mag, and then I actually I started actively seeking out. So I started going and looking at gay online publications, and I was looking at the writers and writers doing articles about gay erotica or things like that. And then I would
Hmm.
go find them on their Instagram, follow them on Instagram, and be like, "Hey, I do erotic art. Would you be interested in doing a feature?" I ended up doing some feature in a print magazine. Can't remember, some German like gay magazine, and I think they sent me copies. I don't know where I put them. But like I was just looking for any sort of like outlet that I could use that I could like quickly grow, because as I progressed, it was getting harder and harder to get organic reach just by posting something up and having someone see it.
Yeah. How did the idea of doing the t-shirts and prints come about? Was it about getting your art out there? Was it about trying to monetize it a little bit, or was it just, hey, this will be fun?
Well, it's interesting, and I don't know where this source of info or wisdom came from, but it was this idea as you get older, and especially when you work in a field or an industry where you can build up a great book of work and things, but you're really only as good as like the last thing that you worked on, and it doesn't really carry any like value into like your life. Like, obviously you'll move up, in your roles, and you'll be able to make more money, but like it's not something that you're having to work to make that money.
Mm-hmm.
And someone told me that first app that came out, that was like the pull your finger app, right? That dude made so much money off of this app. But the great thing about like the app model and things like that is to be able to make something and make it once and be able to continue to make money off of the one thing
Mm-hmm.
that you did. So you're not continually having to make an app to make another 99 cents,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas in my regular role in my work life, you know, I have to do my time and bill hourly. So that's how you make money, is in those increments. So it doesn't matter what you made before, because it's never going to make you money, again, because it's a one and done. So I obviously had been to a lot of, different events where there are t-shirt vendors, and, there's, I saw, some people looked from the outside. I don't know what was on the inside going on, but that they were having some success. I know that I had seen Bobo Bear t-shirts,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, I'm building up this repository of artwork. Why not figure out a way to monetize it? And the idea that you can sell prints and continue to just sell those, and it's not like a painting where if you sell the original one, it's gone, and then you have to paint another painting. And so I also knew that I didn't really want to be sitting in my house with boxes of t-shirts that I had done runs on that weren't selling.
Yep.
So I really looked at some of the print on demand things that were going on. I liked the model. I liked the way they set things up for artists. You have a lot of control. They also have a ton of products. I actually also tested out the t-shirts and the interactions a little bit. So I ordered some stuff, ran them through the washing machine, 5 or 6 times on hot water to see, because I'm a t-shirt snob.
So let's talk about kind of struggles before your breakthroughs. Through all the stories you've told us already, was there ever a moment when you thought you just wanted to give up, or you almost gave up doing the art?
I don't know necessarily if like give up. I think sort of the sad thing about the platform right now is, you know, I have 12,000 followers.
Mm-hmm.
I have zero idea how many of them actually see my stuff, and it's all based on, from what I can gather in my interactions, is whoever you're engaging with at the moment, they will see your stuff and you will see their stuff. But if you're not actively engaging, and there's no way I can actively engage with 12,000 people,
Yeah.
some of those who also could be just like bots or whatever, I don't know. But, and then there's also people that have changed their name or turned off their account or that sort of stuff. So it's almost sort of like a little bit of a joke that I do have what I feel like I worked really hard to get that number. But I mean, if they're not seeing my stuff, I'm not sure like what good is it for me or for them to follow me. So am I still doing stuff like in a vacuum? But to that point, like I've been putting myself out there a little bit more, which I really hadn't done. This was just kind of something that I was just like doing for fun, putting it out there. And I think the first time it happened was like quite a few years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago. And I tend to not put a lot of my own pictures of me uh, on the Instagram, or if I do put them on there, I put them on there for a very limited time because I've always had this thing where I'm like, I want to, um, I want it you to follow me because I'm not a thirst trap. I want you to follow me because you like my artwork.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come slowly to realize, through some advice of other artists out there that like you have to play the game. So I'll play the game and, throw some things out there here and there. But for the most part, I tend to not do it, or if I do it, I'll do it in like spurts and then
Yeah.
maybe go back and turn those off and then put more of a focus. But I was in the gym one day, I'm like doing my thing or whatever, and I hear someone behind me and they go, "Bullet hole," and it was like someone threw cold water on me because
No.
in my head, yes, I rationally knew that I had X amount of followers and that there were people following me, and it wasn't just doing this, but I'm just doing this in my tiny little bubble, with no really thought that there are people in like real walking talking world, because obviously, people will DM me and say, I love your artwork, do you want to do a can you do a commission, like those kind of interaction. I'm like, oh, okay. But like a real live breathing person coming up to me like in a setting
Like a
that
fan.
is normal, it's bizarre. And then I'm like, well, is this some weirdo, you know and they're like, "Oh, I thought that was you. I follow your artwork. I really love your artwork." And it was all just this weird thing that washed over me.
Positive
And,
affirmations.
yeah. And then I've been to like, I did TBRU for the first time at the vendor. I've done the couple of art shows at the Eagle. And I don't know what, I mean, I'm always surprised when someone's like, "Oh, yeah, I already follow you. I've followed you for like 2 years." And I'm like, "Oh, cool. All right. Well, thank you." And I mean, it's super flattering. It's very gratifying that you're creating something and, people have it. And then, I think that's the other thing with like the t-shirts that I sort of like is there are people wandering around, and I always try to, I have it on my little auto message when they buy. I'm like, please post a picture of you in the shirt or the print or whatever it is and
Mm-hmm.
tag me so I can see. And there are some people that have sort of, I feel, religiously bought, my shirts, like anytime I ever put something up. And there's some folks that actually post pretty
That's
well.
awesome.
And so, it's through that and other little sort of interactions like that where I'm just like, oh, okay, like it's cool for me to keep going and, kind of just like see where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
I've had like actually a really great response to not only the artwork but like the photography lately, which has made me encouraged me even more so because I started taking photographs in college and back when you were doing real film and that sort of stuff. And I think you and
Mm.
I talked about this, like the dark room, our love of the dark room. And it's been really nice to be able to flex that muscle again, but probably I don't approach it in the same confidence as I do the artwork, because the
Mm-hmm.
artwork, I'm very solid and confident in knowing my ability and knowing what I can do and being very like confident in that. And the photography, I I still feel very like on the amateur side of things because I use natural light. I don't use studio lighting. I mean, I don't have a fancy camera, or what I would call a fancy camera, because I have friends who are like actually real photographers who I consider are real photographers, and they have like all sorts of equipment and these like giant lenses and light contraptions that are attached. And I'm like, "Oh, I just got my little camera. I'm just taking pictures and you know seeing what comes out." But I am always happy personally with what comes out. So when someone else sort of validates that they like it too, then I'm like, okay, then like I'm on the right track. I'm not deluded. I'm not like, some, drag queen who's on RuPaul's Drag Race who thinks that they're like, the best drag queen ever.
They're the best one, and they were going to win
Yeah,
anyways.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you look a little crusty.
Well, as a fellow photographer, I do like your photography art.
Thank you. And I wouldn't never, I would not even say like I'm a technical photographer because when I took my first photography class, it was pretty much a disaster. My professor was very much a technical, like f-stop, you know, light meter, and he spoke very technically. He was a big fan of Ansel Adams, which nothing against Ansel Adams, but like it wasn't like that wasn't why I wanted to pick up a camera. Like I always loved like Herb Ritts and I loved Bruce
Mm.
Weber and I love, a lot of the commercial photographers who I thought were doing very sort of artful things, during that period of time. And I wanted to be able to like emulate that. I wanted to be able to like do what I could do with a pencil, but do it with a camera. And I took his class, totally tanked it. I was very discouraged. Like the first roll of film, second roll of film, third roll of film. I was very disappointed in what I was trying to output. And the interesting thing is that I had a good sense of composition, but I would, like any other tool that you're trying to use if you're doing art, whether it's painting, whether it's pencil, whether it's ink, whatever the medium is like you're not just going to automatically come in and like bang it out. I mean, there are some people that have a natural talent towards one thing or the other, but my problem was like, oh, they weren't instantly amazing, and I wasn't connecting with the teacher, and he was again too technical for me. And so I kind of just like put my camera away and I didn't look at it. And I had a friend of mine who he was a year under me who was a photojournalism major, and he was a great photographer. And he and I became really good friends, and he would go out on shoots and he would ask me to come with him to help him compose the shot, which I
Mhm.
really enjoyed. And then what I ended up doing was I started tagging along and bringing my camera with me and taking some with. And he was very like in layman terms explaining to me the technical aspect of
Mhm.
how to use the camera to get it to do what I want it to do.
Mhm.
And suddenly my photographs were the output was what I wanted them to be.
Mm.
And so I sort of have him to thank for me having the love of, photography.
So let's close out the interview with some list of questions that I always ask at the end of every interview. These are 10 questions that originally were made famous by James Lipton on Inside the Actor Studio,
Oh, geez.
but I've kind of updated them for an artist.
Okay.
So, you ready?
Okay, I'm ready to think.
What is your favorite artistic medium or tool?
Well, that's a hard question
Yeah.
because, again, like I'm so like if I get burned out on doing something and I've been doing that and I get bored with it, like I move on to something else and suddenly that's my favorite thing to do.
So it changes.
No, it does. It does change for sure. If I came down to it and I was on a desert island, I was like, just give me a piece of paper and a pencil, a lead pencil, and I would be good.
I kind of thought that that might be your choice.
Yeah.
What artistic trend or cliche do you wish would disappear?
I mean, it's cool. I've dabbled in it, AI, because I think it's too referential to like other art. So it's not bringing anything new to the table. It's just regurgitating it. And it's not necessarily even regurgitating it at the level.
What fuels your creativity the most?
There's a great, I don't know if you've seen the documentary, the September issue.
Mm-mm.
It's amazing documentary. It's about the September issue of Vogue magazine, and it was supposed to have been a vehicle for Anna Wintour, and it was supposed to kind of be like very focused on her. And I'm trying to think of her last name, Grace Coddington, who was the head creative director of Vogue magazine. And she used to be a foreign model. And if you look at her younger picture, she's very beautiful, but she's like this crazy looking lady that like has this like crazy red hair. And you look at the way she dressed and she doesn't seem fashionable, but she had the most beautiful artistic eye that you've ever seen and can create some of the most beautiful things. So if you haven't seen the September issue, you should go watch it. It's a great documentary. But she's my hero. She's my spirit animal. I think she's amazing. But she says at the end of the thing, and she was just like, people are always looking for inspiration. And she was like, what I try to tell them is like, inspiration is always around you, no matter where you are. So I always try to take a break, maybe do something that I generally don't do. I mean, there's always things that you can do that are like a go to, go to a museum or, read a book or look at other photographers or, other creative sources. And like, those are always like a kind of easy go to. But like it may have something that comes to you like when you're just on an outing with somebody and you're walking and you see something in a way that you never saw it before. I like people that do street photography and that sort of stuff.
What sound or noise completely kills your focus?
Screaming kids or children, which I don't have to deal with a lot, but like that's probably the most annoying thing that I have just kind of disdain for anywhere I'm at. And it kind of kills the mood anywhere.
What's your favorite word or phrase or metaphor uh, to include in your work and your art? This one always stumps everyone. Like, some people have a word or a number that they include in their art, or there's a favorite phrase of theirs
Like
that they
something
always try to include
something hidden or something.
something hidden
Like
or
what's his
in the
name?
way.
Always put his daughter's name in the
Yeah.
Nina. Forgot what his name was.
And it could be literally or metaphorically.
I mean, there's like tons of ass.
Maybe it's butthole.
A big bubble ass is always in every one of my, or
Ass.
pretty
That's
much
it.
every one. So I guess like a big
It would be ass.
ass. I don't know. I think maybe underneath it all, like something that walks the line, I think, between what I want to do is just like something that has a little bit of a sense of humor, but it's also sexy.
Okay. I like that. If you could see any queer artist, living or dead, honored with a major public monument, who would it be?
Well, obviously Herbert's. No.
I would support that.
Yeah. He actually probably already has one. I mean, I think like for the genre that I'm in, Thomas Finland probably has done, I think, more for any artist and, for sure had a true point of view. And I think, I mean, you could look at him like you would look at any other so-called like traditional artist and see he had certain periods,
Mm-hmm.
that he went through and the evolution of his art. And he was trying to communicate something like even things that, I've read a bit of his background and past, like all the things, the uniforms and things that are sort of really deeply rooted in who he was as a person. And it came out in his artwork and even his kinks or whatever. So I think he should deserve a lot of credit for, I guess, legitimizing the genre, a bit, or at least, within the gay world,
Really do.
not as erotica, but just as like real artwork.
I think he opened the artistic doors for a lot of queer creative people, especially at the time. What is one profession or creative field you could never see yourself in?
I probably would hate to be. I love watching Top Chef. Uh, and like I
Chef.
have this fantasy that I would love. I think I would love plating more than actually cooking because I'm like, oh, that's beautiful. I tend to like other people take pictures of my food sometimes when I'm just like, oh, that's beautiful. I just don't think I would be very good at it, and I don't think I would have the patience to that you need in order to be a really good chef.
If your art could take on a life of its own, what form would it be?
I mean, I think by a life on its own is like having somewhat sort of a legacy where once I'm gone, that it's still there and still accessible and still, someone would be able to see it and still appreciate it for what it was as much. Like whether that will ever happen, I don't know. I mean, you certainly can hope, but I think that's what any artist really wants is like all obviously we all have like, this sense of mortality as we get older. And I think a lot of people, especially straight people, like, their legacy is their family or their kids, or some people think it's their job and their work. And, maybe if you're curing cancer or doing something like that, like, yeah, okay, you probably, have, a legacy or you've invented something, but I think something that can be appreciated after you're gone, you know.
And you perfectly segued into the last question, because that's essentially what the
Okay.
last question is. 100 years from now, what do you hope your art says about you?
That I did what I wanted and I had fun. No, and I mean, I guess that you liked it enough to take it in and look at it. Certainly, I've sold, prints and stuff that people have in their houses, and maybe they'll have those. I don't think it's going to end up on Antiques Roadshow.
That would be an interesting episode that I would watch.
Yeah, no, I mean, imagine the Antiques Roadshow where the gay erotica posters pop up, and they're like, "Oh, it was this guy, and he called himself Bullethole, and for various reasons, and he's no longer with us, and this is going for $10,000." But yeah, I think like having someone still to be able to like have appreciation for what it was and like see what the point of view was, I mean, it kind of doesn't matter. But I guess I'll be like dead in the ground, so I won't care. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed having a conversation with you today, and I really am grateful, and I appreciate you taking the time for this.
I hope I'm interesting enough to listen to.
You will be. Trust. You will be. And it was good getting to talk to you. Thanks for joining us in this raw conversation. If this artist's work resonates with you, you can find their social media links in the show notes below. And remember, art thrives when we lift each other up. Tag us at Salon Naturel or hashtag Art in the Raw with your reactions. We repost listener art every Friday. Unlock uncensored studio tours, erotic art zines, and voting power on future guests by joining our Substack or Patreon. Links below. If this episode sparked something in you, leave a 5-star review with the word RAW in the title. Algorithms hate us. Your voice keeps us visible. This episode was produced by Salon Naturel, with editing by David Smith. Original theme music by Exacat. And keep making art that terrifies the censors. This is David Smith. Until next time, stay raw, stay rebellious.